She said it the way people say things they've rehearsed, casual and certain, like the decision had already been made. Just don't invite her this year. Every single time, she makes it about herself. I was standing at the bottom of my son's staircase, holding a dish of scalloped potatoes I'd made from scratch, and my daughter's voice came through the kitchen doorway like cold air through a crack in a window. Clean, unavoidable. I stood very still. My son didn't argue. That's what I remember most. Not what my daughter said next, not my daughter-in-law's small agreeing laugh, but the silence from my son. The boy I'd driven to hockey practice at 5 a.m. for 6 winters straight. The boy who cried into my shoulder when his father left and said, "You're all I've got, Mom." He didn't say a word. I placed the dish on the bottom stair very carefully, the way you put something down when you're not sure your hands will hold. Then I walked back through the side door the same way I'd come in, got into my car, and sat in the driveway for a long time without starting the engine. It was the 3rd weekend of October. The maples on their street had gone full red and gold, the kind of color that looks like it's trying too hard. Thanksgiving was 4 days away. I'd already bought the turkey. I drove home on the highway with the radio off. The sky over the 401 was that particular flat gray that means November is coming, whether you want it or not. I thought about what my daughter had said. I turned it over like a stone in my hand, smooth from handling, looking for a side I hadn't seen yet. There wasn't one. It meant exactly what it sounded like. My name is Ruth Mackenzie. I am 68 years old. I was born in Sudbury, raised in Barrie, and I have lived in the same semi-detached house in Guelph for 27 years. I worked as an administrative coordinator at a community health center for 31 years before I retired. I have 2 children. My daughter is 41. My son is 38. I have been a widow for 9 years. When I got home, I didn't cry. I hung up my coat. I put the kettle on, and I sat at the kitchen table in the dark until the water boiled. Then I got up and made tea and sat back down again. The house had that particular quiet it gets in the evenings, the kind that has a texture to it, like wool. I used to mind it. For a long time after my husband passed, I minded it terribly. Eventually, I just learned to sit inside it, the way you learn to sit inside weather. I thought about the last 3 Thanksgivings, the one where my daughter arrived an hour late and spent most of dinner on her phone, then apologized to her husband on the drive home, loud enough for me to hear through the half-open window, for having to sit through my long stories. The one where my son's wife mentioned, gently, that maybe I didn't need to bring quite so many dishes since they'd kind of planned the menu already. The one where I cleared the table while everyone else moved to the living room, and no one noticed I hadn't sat back down. I had been making myself small for years. I knew it the way you know a habit automatically, without examining it. I had learned to arrive with my contribution already contained. Bring the scalloped potatoes, Ruth, not the stuffing, too. Don't mention the drive. Don't bring up your hip. Don't tell the one about the ice storm of '98 again. They've heard it. Fit yourself into the shape they've left for you, which gets a little smaller every year, and be grateful for the invitation. The difference was that now I knew they hadn't actually been inviting me. They'd been tolerating me, and soon they intended to stop doing even that. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the bed my husband and I shared for 23 years, and I looked at the ceiling, and I thought about money. Not the way you think about money when you're worried. I wasn't worried about money, but the way you think about it when you start to understand what it's actually been doing in your life all this time without your full attention. My husband had been careful. He'd left things in order: a paid mortgage, a modest RRSP, a TFSA I hadn't touched because it felt like disturbing something. His life insurance had settled cleanly. I lived on my pension and my CPP, and I kept a savings account at the credit union that had grown in a quiet, unglamorous way over 9 years because I simply didn't spend very much. I had enough, probably more than enough. The question that kept me awake was where I had been sending it, and whether I had sent it freely or whether I had sent it the way you leave the light on for someone who never comes home. There was my daughter's car loan. I'd co-signed it 3 years ago, and when she missed 2 payments, I covered them without being asked. There was my son's line of credit, which had my name attached to it from a period 5 years back, when he and his wife had overextended themselves on a renovation they couldn't actually afford. I still made a monthly payment on it. There were the grandchildren's RESP contributions, which I'd set up as automatic transfers, $200 a month, 1 account per child, 4 grandchildren, $800 a month, which I had done gladly. I reminded myself of that. I had done it gladly, at the time. The next morning I called my financial advisor at the credit union. Her name was Patricia, and she'd been handling my accounts for 6 years. I made an appointment for that afternoon. Then I got dressed and ate breakfast and walked down to the park at the end of my street. The geese were still on the pond. They always stay too long. Everyone always wants them to leave. I sat on the bench near the water, and I thought about my husband. He would have known what to say. He had a way of making big things feel the right size, not small, not bigger than they were, just the right size. He used to say, "You can love someone completely and still not let them take what isn't theirs, Ruthie." He was talking about himself when he said it, about his brother, about a dispute over their father's property that had cost him years of sleep. But I had stored it away. I was just now beginning to understand what it was actually for. A woman came and sat on the other end of the bench. She had a dog with her, an old beagle who moved with the particular dignity of an animal who has stopped trying to impress anyone. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the natural, comfortable silence of strangers who have both, for their own reasons, come to sit by a pond on a weekday morning. "Nice day for it," she said eventually. "It is," I agreed. She introduced herself as Carolyn. She was 72, recently retired from teaching, recently moved to Guelph to be closer to her sister. She had the direct, unhurried way of talking that you find sometimes in people who have spent decades managing rooms full of children and have simply run out of patience for pretense. I didn't tell her anything about my daughter or my son, but when she stood to leave, she said, "My mother used to say that most of the damage in families isn't done by bad people. It's done by comfortable people, people who are very comfortable letting someone else carry the weight." She said it the way you say something you've been thinking about for a while and finally found the right ear for. Then she and the old beagle walked off down the path. Patricia at the credit union was practical and kind in exactly the right proportions. When I told her what I wanted to do, she didn't perform surprise. She pulled up my accounts, went through each of the automatic transfers and the joint obligations, and explained the process clearly. The car loan co-signature would require my daughter to refinance in her own name or have the loan settled. That was straightforward. The line of credit my son carried with my name on it could be restructured with the bank. The RESP contributions I could simply cancel through the Canada Revenue forms, though I would need to notify the plan holders. "Do you want me to send the notifications?" Patricia asked. "No," I said. "I'll handle that myself." She looked at me for a moment over her reading glasses, not assessing, just present. "You know," she said, "a lot of people come in here after something has gone wrong financially. It's less common to come in after something has gone right and choose differently." She printed the forms I needed. She wished me a good afternoon. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home, not for turkey. For exactly what I wanted: a small pork tenderloin, a bag of russet potatoes, a bunch of fresh thyme, a bottle of Niagara Pinot Noir, and a bag of the good coffee I usually saved for when someone came over. Then I drove home and put everything away and sat down at the kitchen table with a pen and a legal pad. I was not angry. I want to be clear about that, because people sometimes confuse clarity with anger, and they are not the same thing. What I felt was something closer to the way a room feels when you finally open the window after a long winter. A little sharp, mostly just clean. I wrote 2 letters, one to my daughter and one to my son. Not long letters, not cruel ones. I told them that I had removed my name from their financial obligations, effective within 30 days, and that they should contact their banks to make the necessary arrangements. I told them this was not a punishment and not a withdrawal of love. I told them I had been paying in every sense of the word, to remain welcome in their lives, and I was no longer willing to do that. I did not tell them what I had overheard. Let them wonder. I signed both letters simply, Mom. I mailed them the next morning. Then I called my lawyer, a woman named Sandra who'd handled my husband's estate, and made an appointment for the following Tuesday. Thanksgiving weekend arrived the way it always does in Ontario, fast and cold, with a smell in the air like leaf smoke and earth. On the Saturday, I got a call from my daughter. I let it ring. On the Sunday, my son sent a text. Mom, can you call me? We need to talk about a few things. I read it, put my phone face down on the counter, and went back to my cooking. I had invited 2 people for Thanksgiving dinner. My neighbor Bev, who was 74 and had a bad knee that made driving difficult, and Carolyn from the bench by the pond, whose sister was away at her own family's gathering and who I had run into again on Thursday morning and impulsively invited. Both had said yes, with the gratitude of people who don't expect to be included in things, which I recognized, and which made me want them there more. I cooked everything the way I wanted. Stuffing with sage and sourdough and a generous amount of butter, roasted squash with maple glaze, mashed potatoes with real cream, not the half and half I'd started using because my daughter-in-law was watching her fat intake, cranberry sauce from scratch, a pumpkin pie with a proper pastry crust, which takes time, and so I had made the time. My husband always said my pumpkin pie tasted like the best possible version of October, and I had not made it in 3 years because no one at my son's table seemed to particularly care for it. Bev arrived with chrysanthemums from her garden and a bottle of sparkling cider. Carolyn brought a loaf of rye bread and her dog, who I told her was welcome, and who spent the evening sleeping under the table with great contentment. We ate slowly. We talked about things that mattered to each of us. Bev's late husband, who had played in a jazz band in Montreal in his 20s. Carolyn's years teaching grade 4 in Salt Sweet. Marie, the kids she still thought about. I talked about my husband, which I rarely do in company, because I've learned that grief makes people uncomfortable after a certain point, like a guest who has stayed past the time they were expected. But Bev and Carolyn sat with it comfortably, the way people do when they have their own grief, and no longer treat it like something to be managed. When they left, I stood at the door and watched them go, Carolyn and the old dog disappearing slowly around the corner, Bev making her careful way across the front walk. The sky was very dark and very clear. October in Ontario can be like that, cold enough that the air holds the stars without any blur. Inside, the kitchen smelled of everything I had made. The table was not elaborate, just a proper cloth I'd found in the linen closet, the good plates my husband and I had picked out together at a shop in Elora the year we got married, candles from the drawer where I keep them, 2 slightly uneven in height. It had been a good evening, a real one, not a performed one. I washed the dishes without rushing and went to bed early and slept without interruption. My daughter called 3 more times that week. On the 4th day I answered. She did not start with hello. She started with, "The dealership says my loan has to be refinanced, and they're saying it's because you removed yourself as a co-signer. Mom, what is going on?" "I sent you a letter," I said. "I got the letter. I don't understand the letter." I sat down at the kitchen table. I was holding a cup of tea. The morning light was coming through the side window at that particular angle it does in late October, long and low and somehow both bright and tired. "I think the letter is fairly clear," I said. "You're punishing us." "I'm not." "Then, what are you doing?" I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the dish of scalloped potatoes on the bottom stair. I thought about the car I'd sat in without starting the engine. "I'm making a different arrangement," I said, "with my life and with my money. That's all." "Because of Thanksgiving? Because we didn't include you?" "Mom, we just thought it would be easier. We weren't trying to—" "I know what you were trying," I said gently. "Not cold, not clipped, just honest. And I know what you weren't trying. I've known for a while." She was quiet for a moment. "What does that mean?" It means I've been paying for a seat at a table for a long time, and I've decided the price is too high. I let that sit. You're going to be fine. The loan is manageable on your own. I checked. That's not the point. Then what is the point? She didn't answer that. We stayed on the line for another few seconds without speaking, and then she said she had to get the kids to school, and we hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while. I did not feel guilty. I felt something more complicated than that, not quite sadness, not quite relief, something in the space between them, like the feeling of putting down a bag you've been carrying so long you forgot it wasn't part of your body. My son came to the house on a Saturday morning, 11 days after Thanksgiving. He knocked, which he never did. He always just came in. I noticed that, the knock. He stood on the front step with his hands in his pockets. No flowers, no casserole dish wrapped in foil, just himself in a gray fleece jacket, looking uncertain and older than I remembered. I opened the door and looked at him. "Hi, Mom." "Hello. Can I come in?" I stepped back. He came in slowly, the way you enter a house you're not sure of. He looked around the front hall the way people look at familiar places when they're suddenly not sure they know them. I led him to the kitchen. I put the kettle on. We sat at the table. For a while, neither of us said anything. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, 2 crows argued in the maple. "I got your letter," he said. "I know. I've been thinking about it a lot." He looked at his hands on the table. "About the line of credit. The payments you've been making. I didn't know you were still doing that. I honestly thought it had been cleared. You never asked." He absorbed that. "No, I didn't." The kettle clicked off. I got up, made 2 cups of tea, set one in front of him, sat back down. "I owe you a lot of money, I think," he said. "You do, but that's not why I sent the letter." He looked up. "Then why?" I wrapped my hands around my mug. The warmth of it was good. "Because I've been spending 9 years trying to make myself useful enough to keep," I said, "and I've run out of patience for that arrangement." His face did something complicated. I watched it happen, the sequence of feelings moving through him like weather across a field, quick and visible from the right distance. He opened his mouth and closed it again. "At your house," I said, "the Sunday before Thanksgiving. I'd come over to bring the scalloped potatoes early. I let myself in through the side door. I didn't say more than that. I didn't need to." He went very still. "I heard your sister," I said, "and I heard you not say anything." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. He put both hands flat on the table and looked at them. "Mom," he said, and then stopped, because whatever he'd planned to say had apparently left him. "I'm not here to make you feel terrible," I said. "I'm past that, but I want you to understand what I understood that day. I understood that I had spent a long time making myself available at a cost I was absorbing alone. The money was part of it. The cooking was part of it. The driving, the babysitting when your regular person canceled, the birthday cakes, all the times I said I'm fine when I wasn't, because I didn't want to be a burden. I was trying to purchase belonging, and you were letting me." He was quiet for a long time. "I didn't think of it that way." "I know you didn't. That's almost the whole problem." He drank his tea. We both did. Outside, the crows had moved on. "The kids asked where you were at Thanksgiving," he said eventually. "My youngest asked if you were sick." I didn't respond to that. "They noticed," he said. "I noticed. The house felt off. My wife said she thought it would be fine without the extra dishes." He paused. "It wasn't fine. I don't mean the food. I mean it wasn't fine." "I'm glad you noticed." He looked at me. His eyes were his father's eyes, the same particular shade of gray-green. I had not looked directly at him in a long time, I realized. I had been looking at the space slightly beside him for years, at the chair he wasn't sitting in, at the version of my relationship with him that I was still hoping might materialize. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked. "You can come for dinner sometime," I said. "Not a holiday. Not because you feel obligated, just dinner. And you can come alone, or with the kids if you'd like, but not because you need something from me, not to fix anything. Just because you want to be here." He nodded. "Okay, and you can sort out the line of credit with your bank. I'll give you the paperwork." "Okay," a pause. "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't say anything. When your sister," he stopped, started again. "I should have said something." "Yes," I said. "You should have." That was all. He didn't stay for long. When he left, he stopped at the door and turned around, and I could see him searching for something final to say, some gesture that would compress what needed compressing. He didn't find it. He just said, "I'll call you." And I said, "All right," and he went. I closed the door, stood in the hall for a moment. Then I went back to the kitchen and washed both mugs and set them on the rack and looked out the window at the backyard, where the last of the leaves had come down overnight and were lying across the grass in a rust-colored layer, soft and inevitable. My daughter came 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday, which was deliberate, not a weekend, not a holiday, not a day that carried any particular emotional freight. She texted first, "Can I come by after work?" I said yes. She arrived at 5:15 with nothing in her hands. That was new. She always arrived with something: a bottle, a candle, a small corrective gesture wrapped in tissue paper. Arriving with nothing was either an oversight or a statement. Looking at her face, I decided it was a statement. We sat in the living room this time, not the kitchen. She looked at the room like she was counting what was different. Nothing was different. She was. "I talked to my brother," she said. "I know. He said you heard us. At his house." "Yes?" She looked at the window, a long pause. "I've been going over it in my head," what I said, the way I said it. She turned back to me. Her voice was controlled, but only just. It was a terrible thing to say. It was. "I didn't." She stopped. "I've been saying things like that for a while, haven't I? Not always out loud, just in how I act, in the planning, in what I assumed about what you wanted, and what I wanted you to want." I waited. I told my husband what happened, what I said. He didn't say anything for a really long time, and then he said, "You know your mom has been paying for your car loan for 3 years, right?" And I said yes. And he said, "What did you get her for her birthday?" She paused. I couldn't remember. "A gift card," I said. "To the grocery store." She closed her eyes briefly. "Right. I used it on your grandchildren's Halloween costumes." Something shifted in her face. Not performance, not strategy, just the simple, painful movement of understanding arriving. "I've been letting you carry things I didn't even know were heavy," she said. "Because I didn't look. Because it was easier not to look." "Yes. I don't know how to fix that." "Neither do I said honestly. "But I don't need you to fix it. I just need you to stop pretending it didn't happen." I folded my hands in my lap. "And I need you to understand that I'm not available in the same way anymore. Not because I'm punishing you, because I've decided I'm worth more than what I was settling for." She looked at me for a long moment. Not the careful, managed look I had been receiving from her for years, the one that kept me at a comfortable arm's length. A real look, the kind that costs something. "You are," she said quietly. "You always were." We sat with that. The house was very still around us. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can. Were you lonely? For a long time?" I thought about that carefully. "I was," I said, and I kept that to myself, because I was afraid that if I asked for something I would stop being useful, and if I stopped being useful I would have no reason to be here. I paused. That is a very sad thing to have believed. But I believed it. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. She stayed for another hour. We didn't talk about the loan or the letter or Thanksgiving. We talked about her children, my grandchildren, things they'd said recently that were funny. She told me her youngest had started asking questions about her grandfather, things she didn't know how to answer. I said, "Bring her over sometime." I have photographs. I have stories. I have the kind of time I used to spend rearranging myself to fit everyone else's schedule. When she left, she paused at the door, and without looking at me, she said, "I'm going to try to do better." "I know you will," I said. "I'm going to hold you to it." She almost smiled. Close enough. December came, which in Guelph means the light goes early, and the cold has a particular blunt honesty to it that I have always secretly appreciated. Sandra, my lawyer, finalized the changes to my will during the second week of the month. My estate, which was more modest than my children likely imagined and more substantial than they would have expected, was restructured. A portion to each grandchild, held in trust until they were 25. A meaningful donation to the community health center, where I had worked for 31 years, to support their newcomer services program, which had always been chronically underfunded, and which I had watched struggle for 3 decades. A separate amount designated for Carolyn's school, a small rural school in the north, she'd told me, was running its breakfast program on donations alone, and a sum set aside for Bev, for home care if she ever needed it, with a note that said simply, "Because you showed up with chrysanthemums and asked nothing in return." My children were still in my will. I hadn't removed them. I had simply reduced the amount and added conditions, and in doing so I had made clear, in the plainest possible language, that what I had was not automatically theirs and had never been automatically theirs. It had always been mine. I had simply forgotten that for a while. On the 23rd of December, I got a card in the mail from my daughter. A real card, not a purchased sentiment, but a plain card with her own handwriting inside. She wrote about a specific memory a winter morning when she was 9, and I had driven 40 minutes in a snowstorm to pick her up from a sleepover because she was homesick and embarrassed to say so, and I had brought her hot chocolate in a thermos and not mentioned it to anyone, not even her father, because she'd asked me not to. She said she had forgotten for a long time how many things like that there were, the countless small dignities I had kept for her, and she was sorry it had taken this to make her remember. She signed it. "Love, your daughter. No performance. Just her name and what she was." I read it twice. Then I put it on the mantelpiece next to the photograph of my husband, the one from our first summer together, where he is squinting into the sun at Wasaga Beach and laughing about something I said, and he looks like someone who expects to be happy for a very long time. Bev came for Christmas Eve, and Carolyn's sister who was back from Muskoka, and my son came with his children in the late afternoon, without his wife, who was at her own family's gathering, which was fine. My grandchildren were loud and warm and full of the particular chaos of children who are comfortable, and they ate everything I made and asked for more, and my youngest granddaughter fell asleep on the sofa under the quilt I've had for 30 years, still wearing her coat. My son and I did not discuss the letter or the money or the October afternoon. He helped me with the dishes without being asked. When he was leaving, he stopped and held me for a long moment, the way he used to as a child, without agenda, without needing it to mean anything beyond what it was. I let it mean what it was. After everyone was gone and the house was quiet, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea and looked at the table, at the remnants of the evening, the stray napkin, the faint ring from the cider pitcher, the chairs not quite pushed back in. It looked like a house where something real had happened. I thought of the drive home on the 401 inches October, the gray sky, and the radio off. The moment I had understood what I had been doing and what I was going to stop doing. I did not regret the years before that moment. They had been mine, even the hard parts, even the parts that cost me more than they should have. But I was glad with a quietness and a depth I hadn't expected to be on the other side of them. I am not a woman who has given up on her family. I am a woman who stopped giving herself away in order to keep them. That is a different thing. It took me 68 years to understand the difference, and now that I do, I intend to remember it. The tea went cold. I drank it anyway. Outside, the first snow of the season was beginning to fall, soft and indifferent and completely beautiful, covering everything that had been left behind.